Submitted my talk proposal, one of the reviewers said, wait, is this the web.py thing that like Aaron Schwartz wrote and has been kind of dead in the water for 9, 8, 6 years, something like that? It's like, yeah, that's this one. This is my web framework of choice for Python. Even though it's stuck in 2.7 land, I like that it's very minimalistic, which is my way of doing things. If you note, like my window manager here is super bare bones, and until like an hour ago, this machine did not have a window manager on it because I never leave Emacs. So this is our rough agenda for the talk today. Somewhere like down in the worked example, there's maybe 5 to 10 lines of Python, and it's pretty illustrative, so we should be within the context of PyOhio. So this is my workshop. This is where I work from most days. This is the cleanest it's ever been. This is maybe the same week that we moved into this house. I probably spend 50% of my time writing C and 20% of my time writing Python, and the rest is all stuck in PHP. So most of the time my desk here is this weird tangle of homemade cables and factory cables, and you can never really see the top of it. So I'm a big free software ideologue. I'm one of those crazies who thinks that open source is a terrible phrase, and everything like open source is implied in free software, so just call it free software if that's what it is. So I thought it would be smart to put in some licensing information on my talk. Most of these images I just took from Google Images, so I'm not claiming rights to them. All my content is released under the GNU Free Documentation License. We're going to see some code examples. The Python is all GPL v3 or later, and all the JavaScript that I don't think we're actually going to see the source for, it's all AGPL'd. There's an interesting thought experiment here. If I'm showing snippets of code that are GPL'd but have never been distributed, and they're being recorded and then posted on YouTube publicly, does that qualify as making available to the public under the terms of the license? I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer, and honestly I don't care because I am the author and copyright holder on this, so I can just do whatever I want. But it's an interesting shower thought. So, HTTP primer. Can anyone give me the like 2-sentence spiel of what HTTP is? I guess this doesn't lend itself well to recorded talks. So I'm going to call HTTP an application protocol. It uses request verbs, so these are the verbs you know and love. There's a couple different versions of HTTP. 1.0 only gave us get, post, and head. You probably have never explicitly used head, but your browser uses it. 1.1 gave us options put, delete, trace, and connect. Again, you've probably never used trace and connect by hand, like with curl, but I'm sure you've used the other ones. The entirety of CORS centers around the options request. Other RFCs have added additional HTTP verbs. Patch got added in this RFC. Other specs have added lots of other verbs. I think WebDev added 7 or 8 new verbs. They're outside the scope of CORS. And then what most people don't realize is you can define your own HTTP verbs, and as long as your client and your server both know how to deal with that, you can do whatever you want. It's probably really, really insecure, but one of the examples we're going to show, my Python web server has a greet verb, HTTP verb that it implements, so you can send like a curl request or a JavaScript AJAX request with a greet verb instead of post or put or patch, and you get back some extra junk, which is kind of exciting and cool. This is a good interview question too. If you ever interview people, like what are the standard HTTP verbs? Because, I mean, you know, like everyone knows get, post, put, patch, blah, 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 but most people don't know you can define your own. And as an interviewee, it's somewhat fun sometimes to just start rattling off other ones like dog, cats, whatever. Normally when you talk about HTTP verbs, you also hit on this idempotent, idempotent versus non-idempotent. Idempotent means server state does not change when you issue a request that is of this type. The idea being that if you repeatedly get from a given URL, you're always going to get the same crap back. Like you shouldn't be doing a get and then changing server state. You know, changing server state is supposed to be done with a put or a patch or a post. I think by the spec, head and get are supposed to be always idempotent, but like all things in the web, it's up to implementation. So you can do a get that does change server state, and chances are no one will actually care, but you'll get that one crazy guy that does in fact care. And then we all know and love the HTTP status codes. These are your 200 level codes for OK, 300s are redirects, 400s are client errors, and 500s are server-side errors. These status codes are going to be important when we're looking at our actual requests later with the 10 lines of Python. So does anyone know what this is?
Throwback Sunday.
Yes. This is Netscape Navigator 2, and this is where the web's problems really took off and really started to be huge problems. Note, this is Netscape Navigator. This predates Netscape turning into the Mozilla Corporation, which
I used Mosaic before this.
Okay, yeah. Yes, yes. This is a really cool browser, though. I mean, all the things it gave us in 1994, 1995, it gave us LiveScript for the first time ever, which we now call JavaScript. It gave plugin support for the first time ever to a browser, which is cool, except it led to Flash later on down the road. It gave us HTML frames, which we now call iframes. It also gave us the same origin policy, which is CORS is all about subverting this last bullet point. So the same origin policy, I don't remember what I meant here by this bullet point. The same origin of policy is things you load on a URL are only supposed to be able to interact with URLs that exist on that same origin. This applies to both DOM manipulation and non-DOM manipulation, things like XML HTTP request, which is how your browser does AJAX from JavaScript. So origin here is kind of this tuple of a protocol, a host, and a port. And for two things to have the same origin, these tuples need to be identical.
So context isn't really relevant in terms of same origin policy.
Context.
Yeah, like anything after colons in HTTP. Like,
Oh.
Purely, it's not, there's no subcontext in terms of the URL that implies same origin.
Correct. It's entirely just like string. Oh, I'm sorry, I should repeat that. The question was, so there's no context in comparing origins. And we'll see here, I've got a little table in the next few button clicks that shows some examples of origins that do match and don't match. And maybe that will answer your question better than I did. So the tuples have to match. So if this is my URL that I'm at and I'm like loading some JavaScript or something there, you can see that my protocol is HTTP. My host is www.example.com. I have an implied port 80, and then I have some file system path. If I want to compare it to this URL, it's just a different file system path. My protocol is the same, still implied port 80. My host is the same. So everything is hunky-dory, and it's the same origin. Here, this is a different file system path, different directory. I just wanted to illustrate that it's not down to siblings. It's also like cousins in your file system. Still matches. Now here, you can see that this is HTTPS. So the protocol part of my tuple is going to be different. This fails. In this example, the port is no longer an implied port 80. It's now 82. So this is going to fail. Here, question, does this last URL, is it the same origin as the example?
No, that's why you use a rewrite.
Yes. The answer is yes. The answer is no. It does not match. It is not the same origin. If you look, it's missing a subdomain there. And to most people, the www is extraneous because you use like mod rewrite or some Nginx wizardry or whatever it is. But with regard to CORS, this actually matters. So this does not matter. What about this last one? So here, this is the exact same as the very first compared URL, except I am explicit in port 80 instead of an implied port 80. Yeah, this is a trick question because it's all up to browser implementation, just the way the web works.
So out of curiosity, can you like CORS your way out of HTTP request inside of an HTTPS request? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Security overrides,
Yeah.
so you can like get rid of the security error messages
Yeah.
in the browser with the CORS
Yeah.
setup.
The question was, can you go from an HTTPS connection or origin to a non-HTTP origin and like not start throwing security warnings in your console? I'm sure you can. I don't know, like if you've already gone through the trouble of making your page work under SSL, why would you ever go somewhere else? I'm sure you can. I don't think the browsers stop you. I just don't really see the benefit. I mean, maybe where you're calling is not somewhere you control, but yeah, you can. We can play around with it later. So this is same origin policy, and it's a real stick in the mud, because oftentimes I deploy an API to API dot wherever. I load my single page JavaScript web app client thingy from app dot wherever. I just want to use my API. I don't really care about anything else. So how can I get around the same origin policy? This is a really fuzzy picture on the big screen. That's disappointing. Maybe you can't see it, but in the middle there's like a little security gate, and everyone just drives around it. So really what I want is from any domain, from my domain, from any domain, I want to be able to load images, I want to be able to load script tags and the related JavaScripts. I want to load style sheets. Maybe I want to do iframes, but only if I'm trolling coworkers, probably not for real stuff. I probably want some videos, some plugin content. Not all plugin content is the same. And from special domains, I want to be able to get embedded web fonts and do Ajax, which is, this is 2015. We do everything in the web asynchronously with Ajax. So CORS came around in 2004, I think is when it was originally proposed. So before that, so between 95 and 2004, there was this cool thing called JSON-P. And I don't know when exactly JSON-P originated, but I do know that for my very first programming job ever, one of the interview questions was, I want to get some JSON data from some other domain. How do I do it? And I don't know, it's like straight out of college, I had no clue about this, but it's really kind of cool. It's JSON-P is short for JSON with padding. It works via injecting script tags into the HTML, which is really kind of scary and kind of neat. So because script tags run our any domain column, they're kind of a little wishy-washy sometimes on same origin policy. The problem is with JSON-P, you can only do gets. So ideally, using JSON-P, you cannot change server state. You can only fetch and read server state. So that's a huge bottleneck right there. I mean, that cripples you. You can't make a full like single page Web 2.0 JavaScript web app and only use JSON-P, because how are you going to do puts or patches or posts or deletes? So CORS is useful for this reason and this reason alone. You can Ajax requests with all HTTP verbs to non-origin domains. I mean, realistically, this could have been my entire talk, because the Wikipedia articles on CORS, same origin policy, are very well written. And if you really want to geek out about it, the RFC are accessible for RFCs. So CORS works in two different ways, and they are in fact illustrated like this. One of them is called simple, and one of them is called pre-flight. I'll let you pick which is simple and which is pre-flight here. So first we're going to talk about the simple one. So simple CORS requests only do GET, just like JSON-P. I mean, GET is kind of trivial, right? All you're doing is just, hey, give me a bunch of stuff. I don't want to do anything on your end. I just want to get all this stuff. You have to send an origin header. Your browser probably adds this header by itself because it script engine realizes that you're trying to do AJAX to a non-origin domain. Your browser catches that, slaps on this extra header, sends it on its way. And then you get a response from your GET request that's either what you would normally expect going from that same origin plus this extra header, or you get an error because those are the only two possible states here. Error is all encapsulating except for the former. This access control allow origin header, there are a couple different ways or values that this can take. It can either be an explicit comma delimited whitelist of domains that you are allowing to talk to you. So these are all request, let me back that up. These are all response headers. The origin header is on the request. The access control allow origin header is on the response. So it's up for your server application to send this header back. And oftentimes, .io and the API.barrio.io example, like I just want to whitelist because I don't really want other people using my API. I just want to use my API myself. So you can have an explicit whitelist of domains, or you can do this wildcard, which is the any domain to talk to you via CORS. But that's kind of scary.
I think that's an important point to emphasize, is that it's up to the browser to force the CORS policy.
So in the CORS world, these are called pre-flight requests. And when you try to do, in this case, I'm trying to do a post to api.barrio.io, which is my host header, and I'm coming from app.barrio.io. When the browser sees that I'm trying to do a non-GET request to a non-same origin domain, then it initiates this pre-flight request. So instead of sending my post or my put or my delete right away, it first sends an options request and waits for the response header. And if you, like, from your little Arduino using the Arduino Ethernet shield, if you want to send HTTP requests, you can actually just like sprintf out to this port, which is kind of cool, and you can do things like this. Which,
like telnet and get an option
yeah.
response.
Yeah, or not even telnet. You're basically just like bit banging packets across the wire, which is cool. So the response will have this access allow origin header, which in this example is a wildcard, and it will also have another header, access control allow methods, and this is a comma delimited list of HTTP verbs that are allowed to happen now that this options request got a non-error response. Does that kind of make sense? There's a large mouthful all at once. So there's a couple things going on here. You can see that greet I mentioned before as like a homemade verb. I thought it'd be cool to show that off in the talk, so I added one to the live API of my works project. So that'll be interesting if people notice it in the commit logs. The demo is actually using live stuff, so that's kind of cool too. Also important to note here is, say you have an API endpoint where you don't really want people to be able to delete things. Because it's like, it's the root object in your object hierarchy. You might not want people to be able to delete their account. So all you have to do to stop people from being able to do that, one, just don't implement a delete method. But if you want a delete method that you can use, but other people can't, just leave it off your list here of methods that are allowed at that API endpoint. And short of someone writing their own browser that explicitly ignores headers, their browser won't let them hit or send a delete request to your API or to your origin unless they're also coming from that same origin. I'll elucidate on that point when we look at the demo code, because there are examples where you can only do a put or a post.
So you're saying that basically by you're controlling your allow methods, you have a certain amount of security control over a RESTful interface in HTTP.
Yeah, so the statement was, and it was the restatement of my statement, which was a lot more easier to understand, was that by limiting what you put in this allow methods header, you have much more fine-grained control over what actions are allowed to happen on a given API endpoint. And then I rephrased his rephrasing, so maybe it was all lost. So this is step 2 of a pre-flight response. So I sent an options request, or rather my browser sent an options request. Now my server app responds with these headers and maybe some others. And then the third step is the actual like post or put that I wanted to do originally. Now the browser sends it on its merry way.
That's if it's allowed.
Yeah, exactly. That's.
What happens if it isn't allowed? What further action takes place, if any?
So the question was, this third and final step of sending the actual put or post or delete will happen if that verb is in the list of allowed methods. What happens if it's not? What will happen is in the Firefox and Firefox derivative browsers, what appears to happen is the options request will go and you'll get a response back, and then it will try to do the whatever verb you were doing, and it will almost immediately error, and either the browser will catch it and throw it as an error, or your server itself will just like return a method not allowed, which I don't remember off the top of my head what status code that is.
400 or 500?
Yeah, it'd be a 500, but I don't know if it's like 504. Well, that's timeout, so that was a bad example because I knew what that one was. But yeah, it throws some kind of error. But most of the time, the browser will not send that request. And yeah, depending on how brave I want to get with production code, maybe we'll just wholesale delete something and see what happens.
My experience has been that the browser never actually ships it off to the server, but like looks at a client side and tosses a local security exception or a core security exception client side.
Yeah. So the statement was that this gentleman, in Mark's experience, it seems like the browser just catches it and doesn't ever send it and just throws a security exception. That's probably true in the Chrome world. I don't know. I don't ever leave the Firefox derivative land. So let's look at some code. So where am I looking? I had to redo my color scheme here. And all right. So this is web.py, or web.py. Has anyone ever used web.py in this room besides me? One guy. I like it. I like it. So this is what's actually deployed on our servers right now. And as you can see, I talked about this access control allow origin header, and we're using a wildcard to allow everyone. The idea here being that Barrio is like this software as a service inventory forecasting thing, which is kind of cool. But really, people are paying for access to the API and for that tool set. I don't care if they use the iOS app. I don't care if they use the web app. I don't care if they go to our web app and right-click, save as HTML, modify it to their heart's content, and then just hit our API. I'm still getting their money so that their username and password still work. So if they want to run it from file : // home whatever, no skin off my back. I don't care. I mean, they already have access to it, right? It's JavaScript and HTML and CSS. So that's why we're doing this. I talked about this credentials and how in the simple example of CORS, credentials are not sent. In the pre-flight, the complex version of CORS, the pre-flight responses, you can enable credentials to be sent. There's some caveats to that. It's a little wonky. It's not just like, it's not the same way that HTTP authorization stuff works without CORS, but it's similar enough for all intents and purposes. I also mentioned that you can specify what other headers you are going to accept from CORS requests. So that's what this access control allow headers header is it is a comma delimited list of headers that I'm going to allow to exist in CORS requests. So we use the X authorization header in all requests that come to us. It's got to have some token in it. And we also use the content type header. So I want to allow those to come to me from any other domain. And then, so you can see that this is our user's route. So when someone hits api.barrio.io/v2, because you should always version your APIs, /users with no ID, I really only want people to be able to post to this. I don't want them to be able to delete every user. I don't want them to be able to put to every user, because that's kind of ambiguous. So in this access control allow methods header, you can see that my comma delimited list of allowed verbs is only post and options. And now that I'm looking at this, I almost wonder if the options in there is extraneous. It must be, because if I'm in here, I've already issued my options request, so I've already allowed it.
I've run into that on my Mac, where if I was like on my Ubuntu server, I didn't have to have an options method allowed. But on my MacBook, I had to have an options configuration in the Apache config for it to work properly.
Interesting. So the statement was that in OS X versus Ubuntu, the gentleman has noticed that he does need to allow an options method, which again, I mean, that's kind of been the additional moral of this talk, is that this is the web. Everything's browser implementation based, and if you don't like it, you can always go in and muck with it yourself.
One of the other things you have to be careful about, some of these accept wildcards and some do not. I don't remember if it's methods or headers, but they do in some browsers, but not others. So like Firefox
Yeah.
on Mac versus,
Yeah. Yes, so the statement was like, all of these headers are kind of wonky comparing one browser to another, which is the nature of the beast. In my extensive testing, and I say extensive in air quotes, and quite sarcastically, this set of headers seems to work just fine in the Firefox, Firefox derivatives, Surf, and I installed Chromium once upon a time on a machine, and it works. Or it worked at that time. I don't use it, I don't know. So you can kind of see how I deal with an options request here. Post, the same thing. So the important part here to note is that this is the list of headers that you need. That's the cool takeaway from here. What I really want to show. So this is my single user class, which is what gets hit if someone issues a request to /users/ some ID number. It's real similar stuff. Same access control allow headers, same access control allow origin. Where it's different is that access control allow methods list, because on an individual user, I want to be able to do all these things, including greet, which you can see down there is kind of fun. Oh, weird. It's hard to type and look over there. So I have 1 minute left. Is that what that? Oh, 15. Good. I'm glad I misread that. Whew. So this is kind of fun, right? Like looking at someone else's code that's really ugly and hacky. It's like, oh God, maybe I feel better about myself because I don't write crap like that. So this is my employer, Barrio. We're a bootstrap startup in Detroit. It's our fancy website. Here's our super fancy in development web app. And here's our API. If you look at my domains here, you can see that the API lives at api.barrio.io. The app lives at app.barrio.io. And I never really thought about CORS, ever. And then one day, I was running everything locally and running my API locally against a local database. And I had the web app open. And I changed one thing. I don't remember what it was. And suddenly nothing worked. Like, what? And then I was like, oh, well, this is weird. Let me try running it from file : / / What the hell? Why isn't this working? All right, let me fire up curl. Curl worked. Man, this is really odd. So I went and mowed my lawn and had a beer and came back to it the next day. Oh, I know what this is. This is CORS. Obviously, curl is not going to matter because it doesn't go through a browser. So who cares? So let me. I wanted to show this using the actual Mozilla Developer Tool Console because it's really cool that this feature set is built in, but it doesn't show options requests in the network tab, which is kind of the whole point of this talk.
It helps your net.monitor should be lit up for you too.
Oh, it is.
It's a little easier.
Yeah, but now I've just got this habit of going right, so. So down here in the bottom, you'll see the network requests. I'm going to log in with this super secure user. So this is going to be a post request to that /v2/users endpoint. And if you look in my requests here, whew, why is this not working? Oh, I know why. I'm not connected to the network. So I guess maybe this is a good time while I connect to the network to take questions. Anyone have questions that they don't think are going to be answered by this super slick demo? Well, it's okay. Now I just have to do the whole captive portal thing.
I will say that I learned about CORS the same way you did, working on my development station, trying to hit another server online, and all of a sudden your stuff doesn't work. It's like, what's going on? Yeah. Which is frustrating, but then kind of cool when, you realize what the problem is. And you're like, oh, maybe I do know what I'm doing. This is neat.
So the original solution was always to create a separate proxy route, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the statement was, the original solution to this was create a proxy route or something like that. Yeah, you could still do that. No one's stopping you. CORS is all, it's one of those things where it's up to the developer to do it right, not anyone else. So since it all happens on your server and it's all just header based, if you screw it up, you screw it up. And if you get it right, it works. It's kind of magic. This is my post request to auth. And when I want to grab some sales or items in my inventory, you can see here that this second, we won't talk about sales because this is a weird endpoint. But items here, you can see that I issue a options request. And in my request headers are down here at the bottom. You can see that my browser threw in an origin header, and it threw in a host header. And one, by virtue of the fact that it issues an options request, we know that the browser is doing the pre-flight, complex, convoluted route for CORS. So in my response to this options request, I have back all these access control allowed. And here's my list of headers that I'm going to accept in the later request. There's my list of methods that I'm going to accept. And I'm going to allow any origin. I'm going to allow user credentials. So my browser sees that I got a response. It remembers to some extent that I was trying to issue a GET in this instance. Or a get. And so then it actually issues the real request to items here, just the normal everyday GET request. And when you look at the request headers, you see that it's still added an origin header and it still added a host header. The host header is there on all your HTTP requests, but the origin header definitely gets added for CORS stuff. And my response headers here, this isn't an options request, so I don't have to return some of those headers for access control, allow, whatever. But you can still see down there I left in access control, allow origin star, and access control, allow origin credentials. And for the life of me, I'm trying to think why they're in there. I know they're in there for a reason. I mean, I never make mistakes or copy pasta errors, so there's got to be some reason they're there, but I can't remember why. So this is kind of cool. So now we're free from same origin policy tyranny, and we can do all kinds of fun stuff. Yeah. Questions?
Yeah, couldn't you achieve the same thing by using document domain instead of burial.io?
Yeah, so the question was, couldn't you achieve the same thing using document.domain? Yes. I would be hesitant to say that you can achieve the exact same thing, but you could achieve similar results, which is probably all that matters. I think with using document domain, it's still up to browser implementation. And yeah, I mean, that's a hack, right? That's like doing the text-align center to center an image. That's, yeah, it works, but it's ugly and clunky, and it's not going to work everywhere. It probably would work everywhere. I don't know.
I'm not sure it works in IE, or there might be some
Yeah.
stipulations in IE.
Yeah, now that I have banged my head against the wall enough to get CORS working, I'm just going to use it because I know what to do now. So yeah, yes.
So you get an options request.
You get an options request, each request to the server with the response. So you're always doing pre-flight, or does the browser cache that?
So the question was, do you always get an options request? I want to say that you probably don't. If you look here, I have a cache control, no cache header. So I'm pretty sure that that probably obliterates the options request. I guess we could just look at the options request and see if it does. Oh, I don't have it in there. I don't know.
Was the cache control on the GET itself?
Oh, yeah, the cache control was on the GET. Yes, the cache control is on the GET. So the GET will not be cached. So, and like the post and the puts and all those won't be cached, which kind of makes sense. So maybe because the end result or the resulting request is not cached, the options request is not also cached. But it sounds like a cop-out answer to always say that it's browser implementation. But I think that I would say yes, you probably get an options request every time, mostly because if you're not caching the resulting one, then how does the browser have any indication that it's actually allowed to do this thing? Other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. And
We got more questions.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Earlier
You talked about using the XArgs or for authentication, the X authentication. Could you touch on that in a minute for us?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of lied before when I said that this is production code. This is really old production code because I didn't want to, I still wasn't sure about that whole shower thought of making available to the public. So I pulled a really old version. So the auth class, so the way that web.py works is, oh, this is going to take forever. Anyway, you specify a regex of routes and then a class that maps to that route. And then you have special named functions that are your HTTP verbs. So when the user posts, like I said, this is really old code. Look at that, MD5ing something to store it. This works in my shop to inventory resistors, and now let's try to build a business around it. So this has all been changed. Rest assured, your data is safe with us. Where was I going with this? Oh, yeah, so we use the X authorization header, and basically we just get this token, which in this version of this model.generate auth token down here, what comes back is just out of dev random.
So you're basically doing your own like key exchange because you can't do a basic auth through that header.
Correct. So yeah, I mean, we reinvented the wheel, and our auth system now, I think, uses the Django auth stuff, I want to say. One of our other guys wrote that because he looked at this and started crying. But the basic idea is you just like send something back. So you're not going to be able to read this. So I was going to use curl to show you, because then you'll see what all comes back. While I'm typing this, are there other questions? Like I said, the Wikipedia articles are very nice. They're pretty accessible. So you can see here, maybe you can, in my JSON response, I have an auth token key and it has some value. And then I've wrapped the bootstrap like sync function, or not bootstrap, the backbone.js sync method to add that as the X authorization header on every request. I'm sorry, what? Thank you. Yeah, so that's how it works. It still works this way, but the back end is not the MD5.
Basically, stuffing that token in there when you auth your user in gives you the credentials to then go cross-site.
Yes, because were we to use a cookie, we would have been hit by that whole problem of you can't send user credentials over CORS in most circumstances. So this was a way around that is at least somewhat secure. I mean, also, like, OAuth is really tier-inducing to implement, and so I didn't want to do that, but I wanted our API to be able to be ingested by anyone that had a username and password. So this seemed like the easiest, quickest, simplest way to make it work everywhere. Yeah. So if you have questions, comments, concerns, you want to work for a bootstrap startup in the wonderful metropolis of Detroit, you can email me at zwick@barrio.io. I hang out on Freenode and the Mozilla IRC server. And the LaTeX and PDF of these slides is all up at that URL. And if you don't like using GitHub and you don't like their non-free JavaScript, I will tweet the link to a non-GitHub Git repo that you can clone. Just before my talk, I was still waiting for DNS to propagate, so not up in time.
Yeah, I had one more question.
Yeah, sure.
I think like some of the other people, what I know about this topic, I found out in frustration when something stopped working, and your presentation filled in a couple of gaps in my knowledge. But I found this very difficult to research. And if I was working in one browser, I would come to a different conclusion than if I was working with curl or another browser.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how'd you figure this out, and what resources, how long did it take you? Because this is not common knowledge.
I will agree with you there. The way I figured this out is my day job is not as a web developer. I think we're officially out of time. I don't know if there's a talk in here after mine. But we'll just keep talking, and when they turn off my mic, it'll end up not being recorded. My general day job is not web development. I do a lot of embedded systems stuff. So like just reading standards and specs and like just reading them for weeks and months at a time, and then going like, oh yeah, that's how it works, and like playing around with Wireshark to just look at things is just standard operating procedure. And it was just I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like I sat down on one night and was like, oh, this is going to work now. This was like a month of puttering away on it to get the combination of everything right.
One little tip, if you're developing locally, one of the key things that you want to do if you're trying to go cross-site off like your local host doing development work is to make sure that you have a local web instance rather than running off of file space so that you can actually put the options headers in.
Yeah, so the statement was if you are running everything locally, sometimes it's fun to run things from file : / but at that same time, then you don't really have access to put in all the headers you might want or need from the request end of things. So I think we're out of time, and if anyone wants to keep talking, we can hang out in the hall or whatever. Thank you again.